Well, the next speaker is going to talk about another slice of this that is kind of near and dear to our hearts, which is really the Camp Bowie. Tyler Alberts, who is coming up, but he has he graduated from Arlington Heights School and went on to, I think, study at Tech, but his early professional development was in something a little different. He wasn't a pilot, but he traveled and helped with a number of the traveling shows. In fact, when I first read his bio, he said he traveled with Miss Saigon all over the world. And I said, well, that must have been really a good time. But no, he traveled with the show, Miss Saigon, traveled with Beauty and the Beast and another, providing technical support for those shows. So he was really in the entertainment business. But what he explains that along the way, he's become very deeply interested in the history of his hometown, as well as bringing into perspective some of the individual units that have so much history, the 90th Division, and he can explain that. But Tyler is the expert on Camp Bowie. And when we think about, we talk about Camp Bowie all of the time, but you know, very few people realize Camp Bowie was this huge military camp that Jim was just talking about. So it's a real honor to introduce Tyler. He also has, and he created a big part of his accomplishments, creating the Fort Worth Military Museum, which is on Dorothy Lane along 7th. And if you've not attended or gone to that museum, you really need to, because he is an example of someone who has taken on his passion for a piece of history and created a place where you can experience that. Tyler Alberts.
Thank you very much, Doug. And thank you very much for inviting me to come out here and speak with y'all today. I'm excited to come out and talk to you. Again, my name is Tyler Alberts. I'm the Executive Director for the Military Museum of Fort Worth. I've been doing history on and off for going on 15, 20 years, kind of on the side when I wasn't touring. But now that I'm off the road, I've kind of committed myself to trying to bring some of Fort Worth's history back to the people I've enjoyed and grew up on the west side of Fort Worth, and have always enjoyed the history of Fort Worth itself. So the Great War comes to town in Fort Worth, as Jim gave us a great overview. We declare war on April 6, 17, and shortly after start mobilizing our troops. Of course, Benny Keith, that was also mentioned, the chairman for the Chamber of Commerce, and the mayor, W.D. Davis, both were aware of an opportunity that was missed before during the Spanish-American War, in which they might have gained the camp that they had been looking for to have some type of monetary spur from the military. But it never panned out, and when the First World War came around, both of these gentlemen saw the opportunity to help Fort Worth grow, and grow did it. And so they went up to D.C. to meet with some people up there and to pitch why Fort Worth was a good site to bring their base to, considering the soil samples were very similar to that of France, and many other different elements. But they were successful in their pitch, and they got a site approval on June 11th and 17. And less than a month, just a little over a month later, they were starting to begin construction. They already had a crew of about 3,500 men here, had already established some headquarters buildings, some operational buildings, but they started bringing stuff in on the railroads and lumber from the east, and started constructing the camp. The 36th Infantry Division was designated to be the first large division to train at Camp Bowie. And so they arrived, and the camp officially began their training in August 24 of 1917. A couple of things about it. There were a lot of camps that popped up all around, so you got to come up with names. A lot of the names were famous Alamo heroes. We had Camp Bowie here in Fort Worth. Camp Travis was in San Antonio. There was a Crockett down near Houston. And as I mentioned before, one of the reasons that we were able to get the base here is because by the time they had pitched the need for the base and the training base here at Camp Bowie, they'd already been seeing the battles develop in World War I. They'd already seen that it was a trench warfare battle. Everything had become very stagnant. Matter of fact, the Americans were going to be used as some type of final push to break the stagnation of the war, which eventually happened. But they had done soil composition samples, and they found out that the terrain with some of the hills that we had here, especially where Camp Bowie was, and just to the northwest, there in Westover Hills, and down in the kind of hilly area of Como as well, that was very similar to some of the front line area. The soil compositions were very similar, and it would be perfect training ground for the men to dig their trenches and to learn how to deal with trench warfare. The camp was massive. A lot of people think the camp was outside of Fort Worth. Well, it was at that time, because Arlington Heights, which was a failed residential development started by a gentleman named Chamberlain, Fort Worth ended at the Trinity River, basically, and everything across the other side of the Trinity River was not Fort Worth property specifically. So they figured that they put the camp out there. They already had a rail line from this failed residential development that used to run along what was called Arlington Heights Boulevard and is now Camp Bowie Boulevard. But the camp was so big, it stretched from White Settlement Road in the north all the way south to Vickery Road at the railroad tracks, and started in the east about at University and the big wagon wheel intersection of 7th and Camp Bowie and University, and it stretched all the way out to Como Lake. So it was, a little over just at 2,200 acres. There was some other interesting tidbits. The Choctaw telephone squads began their initial training at Camp Bowie, and were actually used later on in combat. And we're going to have a really neat exhibit that Clara and Bob are putting together at the library exhibit coming up in May to cover the Choctaw service with the 36th in World War I. There was also a full-length firing range for rifle fire and heavy machine gun fire, and that was located all throughout Westover Hills. The hills and the terrain of Westover was set up really nicely for the gentlemen to be able to practice shooting across valleys at enemy targets, things like that. It was a much better training situation than just having like a lot of people in some of the camps out in other parts of Texas, like outside, for example, Camp Travis in San Antonio, was taken just outside of San Antonio on wide open ground. Nice flat land, lots of open prairie, build a bunch of gridded streets, build a bunch of barracks, and you're off with a running camp. Camp Bowie was quite a bit different from that, and the fact that it was incorporated into what was kind of already a somewhat existing community with large mansions and homes all throughout the middle of it. And even the World War I training trenches that covered a large section of the southwest portion of Como. So basically on both sides of the railroad tracks at Bryant, Irving, and Vickery, all the way north, or to the, just past Horn, probably about 4 to 5 blocks north of Vickery. All of that, there were about 10 miles of trenches that had been dug and were used for training that the guys stayed in for weeks at a time. Here's a photograph of some of the troops arriving. They used the rail lines that were coming down just to the west of the Trinity River, and that's where they would get off at the remount station, and then they would march to their barracks, or they weren't even barracks, they were tents. The only barracks and the wooden barracks that we see were actually not what they slept in. Those were just their mess halls. It was a place for them to have classes and training during the days when they weren't drilling in the field. As we were talking about the scope of Camp Bowie, you can see that this is White Settlement Road up top. We've got Vickery down here. All this in the orange is basically the camp. Some of the sections in white, I left white so we could read them, but you'll have pockets like this little jog here, how it comes down. All of these camp boundary lines were drawn around current and existing homes that were existing on the camp, and even in some cases, like down in this area where there was the main part of the hospital. The Camp Bowie had a large base hospital to the west. Just below it was an old Arlington Heights sanitarium and drug addiction center that was there, and then also a small women's college that was down here. And all of these elements can be seen in a lot of the panoramic photography that exists of the camp at the time. We're currently working on doing a nice then and now comparison with some of that photography. One of the interesting other unique things to Camp Bowie, unlike any other World War I camp, because it was placed over an existing neighborhood, it's one of the few places that we will actually have the opportunity of doing then and now surveys and photograph matching, because you have some of these original homes, whether it be like the home on St. Quinette or the Bryce houses or the old McCart houses or things that we, big iconic homes over there that are landmarks. Some of them gone now, about 10 of them still around. The Messer home, which is located right on the edge of 30 and Merrick Street right here, is now a B&B, and it's quite prominent in a lot of the photography. But it was a very large camp, and it was trained to handle about 50,000 men at any given time, 40,000 with a push up to 50 if needed. This is an aerial photograph taken in I believe probably 1917 based on it. You can see this is Camp Bowie Boulevard here. This is the camp headquarters here. The Triangle Park, where the statue of the World War I Veterans Park is right about here. You would have Stripling Middle School somewhere right in here, and then a little bit further back down in here would be Arlington Heights. You can see the far reaches of the Trinity River in the park, the wooded areas around the park. But it was a pretty extensive camp. Of course, all of these diagonal horizontal or parallel lines that run in parallel with Camp Bowie have all been torn up and were redistributed into the grid formation that we have now. But this is how they originally laid the camp out. As I said, most of the living that went on with Camp Bowie was not done in barracks living. They lived in tents. These were basically wooden-based short sidewall tents with canvas tops, a stove in the center with a spout that came out the top, smokestack. And this is what the guys lived in. Winter, summer, rain, you name it. It was not a great, fun existence, I'm sure. I grew up on that hill up there, and it get awfully windy up there. And I'm sure that even some of the guys riding home talk about that they can go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning and get out of their bunks and see the nice dirt outline of all the dirt that has settled around their bodies while they slept. Here's what we're talking about as the gentlemen do some training. You can see how the tents have been taken down. This is probably for hotter parts of the summer. When they're outside, they're all in short sleeves, so at least they could get some type of airflow through. But this is basically, if you also notice, one of the key things that you should notice if you're familiar with the west side is the complete and absence of trees. There's virtually no trees whatsoever up on that hill. Now there are a few, but they were really, really limited. These are the styles of barracks. This is a particular, for the base hospital, one of the medical supply depots. Just a lot of wood slatted houses, everything raised on pier and beam foundations. Very basic. I think there were only 4 styles of buildings that the camp used when it came to mess halls for the men or for the supply stations. We have also with everybody coming to town. It was a big economic boom to have so many new individuals coming from all over, and all of them were employed. They all had money coming in from the government. They all had money to spend, and everybody tried to get a piece of that little pie and tried to get them to use their services in one way or another. So there's a lot of great advertising and things that were going on, and sandwich shops and photo studios and souvenir shops and everything you can think of to bring people in. So training in trenches. Oh, where's my file? Well, oh well. There was going to be a nice map that showed the outline of the training of the trenches, a little PDF, but apparently it's disappeared on me. This is some of the training that the gentlemen did with bayonets. When the 36th Division showed up, they were basically what was called the Square Division at the time. They worked off of 2 infantry brigades. Each infantry brigade worked off of 2 regiments. And they were primarily made up of Texas and Oklahoma men. A lot of them were used to this heat, this weather. However, there were a lot of people that came down as somewhat not late replacements to the divisions that came out of northern states. And these men didn't fare so well in the heat. Here we've got what's basically a bayonet practice line. They've taken wood stakes and hung bags from them, and the guys are just going up practicing their bayonets. Here's a nice layout of the trench system. You can see this is the railroad track in Vickery. This is Bryan Irving Road here as it curves around. This is the main section of how much the trenches covered. This is Ridgely Country Clubs and their estates all right in here. So just on the back side of them, there were all these training trenches. And you can see from this aerial photo in 1917, I've taken red lines and marked out the actual trench systems. So this photograph came to me from through Bill Morris, and I'm not really sure who originally found the photograph, but whoever did had a really great eye. I believe it was the Stories It Goes was labeled as the Benbrook Trenches, but there's really no clear or discernible items that would tell you where in Benbrook it might be. There is a little bit of a road here that you can see in the corner. And apparently another photograph surfaced from about 53, an aerial photograph, and it was noted that, let me go back, it was noted that this little area right in here was similar. This little line of trees and this little creek bed, which is basically now Bryant Irving Road, is right about here. And so they were able to find that same area. This is kind of what the trenches look like up on top. You can see that they are fairly deep. They have crossover paths over the tops of them, or these lead into underground bunkers. All of these trench systems would be designed to have probably a true 2x6 hardwood board in the floors, probably 2 of them, to make the bottoms of the trenches up. They would have the drainage and sewage go underneath that. And then they would lead to, like I say, little bunkers and things that they could train in. And it's clear from reading the history on what training went on at Camp Bowie that the guys would spend sometimes 2 and 3 weeks at a time out here getting acclimated to living in trench lifestyle. Now, even here back in the stateside, they had big problems with rats and all kinds of things. Also, the Spanish influenza broke out, and it didn't help keeping them in contained small bunkers like this when those when that flu was going around and caused so many deaths at Camp Bowie. Matter of fact, the base hospital was quite inundated with Spanish flu cases. You can see that the trenches were pretty deep. They were head high. They were in zigzag formation, so you couldn't shoot straight down a trench and take out large lines of people. They had sandbag tops. They had tin and wood paneled sides to keep the walls from collapsing in. They dealt with all of them in the various weather conditions that Fort Worth has to offer up over the time period. This is a 53 photo taken of the area. You can see this is Horn Street right here. This is Vickery. There's a nice little quaint, cozy motel here on the corner, if you've ever seen. It's still there in the 50s, and it's still there today. But you can see from these red dotted outlines, they matched up perfectly. These red outlines came from that 1917 photo, and they happened to overlay on what were still existing. You could still see the remnants of the trenches in the 50s, because none of this land had ever been developed. Now, it's been developed since, and you can see that, well, unfortunately it's a little light in here with the sun, as dark as I'd like it, but you can still see some of these trench lines are out over open ground that is still yet to be developed. So I think there might even be a possibility with a little bit of research and possibly a little bit of ground penetrating radar that we might be able to see if any of these trenches still exist. It's just all open land, but I haven't had any time to follow up on that. One of the great things about having this trench system so close is that it was just down the street from the camp. They could walk there. It was a mile or so away, and they could spend their time there and get back to their barracks fairly easy. I think that after doing some of the reading of some of the writing of the gentlemen who actually made it to combat and made it back, the training that they got in the trench systems was invaluable to the life that they were going to be facing on the front lines. It gave them the experience, because really up until World War I, there had never been a true static war with such defensive positions on either side. Of course, trench and fortification systems are no new thing to warfare. They've been used in the Civil War extensively. But to have such a static battle where you had millions of men on each side just in trenches running for hundreds of miles was a brand new way to commit warfare. And spending the time out in these types of trenches was going to give them the abilities to survive. Now there's markers and monuments. That's one of the things that we're working on. now in trying to map out all of the actual buildings of Camp Bowie. We have disposition maps from 1917 that explain where all of the buildings were, and we can have some overlays. It does not appear that there are any buildings whatsoever that have been left over from the camp. There, you know, I grew up there on Madeline Street, just off of Camp Bowie Boulevard, and I can't tell you the hundreds of people that believe that their house was the officers' quarters, or it's just amazing. But there doesn't seem to be anything left. There are, like I said, there are still homes that were there when the camp was there, and I think that they're going to be the key to kind of unlocking the mysteries of what really and what was where and what was not where over this next 2 years. We'll be doing an exhibit at the Military Museum starting in May of next year. At the same time, the exhibit kicks off at the library, where we're going to be doing a large photograph exhibit and map exhibit that will show the whole outlay and setup for Camp Bowie. Some interesting things about Camp Bowie is that it did change Fort Worth, and the fact that it brought so many people to Fort Worth. The economic boom, as Jim showed, the statistics are pretty overwhelming. I'm not sure that anything has had as large of an impact in such a short period of time as World War I did on Fort Worth. The amount of people that chose to come back here after the war says a lot about the community and the people that formed for the camp to begin with. We have a lot of prominent people that had served in the 36th Division. It was commanded by Lieutenant John Grable, who also had Commander Hewlin, was commander of the 178th Infantry, or 141st Infantry Brigade, and he came back. Of course, Hewlin Street's named after. A lot of the streets over on Camp Bowie are also named after Pershing, after General John Pershing. Sure. A lot of the streets named over there do have something to do with the camp. El Campo Road is actually one of the first roads that was put in over there, and names as such. And you have a Bowie. They changed some of the names from the camp, from like Bowie Drive and Crockett Avenue and some of those, and changed them up. But they put them in honor of people that had significant connections to World War I and Camp Bowie. They now have this permanent marker at the Veterans Park on Camp Bowie Boulevard there. The 36th Division's veterans were heavily involved in doing a lot of the research for the markers and things. Here's their marker at that same camp talking about their service for World War I and World War II. And then, of course, me mentioned going back to talking about how the war and art and some of those types of things. We have a great sculpture that's been kind of an iconic piece of Fort Worth since I was a kid in the 80s with this statue called Duty done by Mark Barbara Walker. And Dr. Walker did an incredible statue for sacrifice in honor of World War I. And I'm hoping that we can, over the next 2 years, bring a lot more of the personal stories and a lot more detail to people about World War I. And we hope that y'all can all come out to the various exhibits that are coming for World War I. There's a great exhibit over at the Tarrant County Archives right now as well that covers a lot of the elements that were happening during that time. And we just urge all of y'all to come out and be a part of it and learn some more details. You can only say so much in 20 minutes speech, but we've got hours and hours of information if you want to come over and peruse it. But if you have any questions? Anyone?
That's great.
Yes, ma'am.
For the houses that were still there before the camp was built, did people remain in those houses?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. On many occasions, yeah. What they basically did is the camp had no boundaries. Up for the first year, you didn't even need a pass to get on the base. You just walked in, walked off. It was very arbitrary in the beginning. For example, if you know where the Camp Bowie Bank is, it used to be a little Camp Bowie Theater. That was the Zalowski's home, and they're the people who started that little commercial row that's right there, next to the bank. And so they just had an outline, just like, the camp technically did not include Camp Bowie Boulevard. It stopped on the north side and picked back up it stopped on the south side and picked back up on the north side. It was technically neutral property. And so you would have notch outs around these other properties that were connected to that. And like even, like I said, if you go, the Jennings house is a house that's kind of just off of Kenley and Collinwood, I think, just down the street from where the San Quinette home is. And it was squared off where its property was dotted lined, where it was just kind of in the middle of the camp all by itself. And you can see the barracks or the tents built up all around the house, and they just kind of came and went. Now, sometimes those people did not want to deal with all the dust. There was a lot of dust and noise and people moving and all that. So some of the people did retire to homes that they had inside in town. Like there are a lot of people who had, think of Heights at that time as like a getaway community. Still had some really nice homes built in the early 1900s. You know, the old Arlington Inn had been down there for a few years before it burned down. It was kind of a wealthier person's getaway, except for some of the middle-class people or so, I guess that's what you would call them, that lived around there that were helpers and workers for that area. But yeah, there was a very unique combination of military and civilian activity that I think we should be very interested to learn about. It's just not, I can't find any examples of it in any of the other camp histories that I've read about where you've really just got this base right in the middle of a neighborhood, you know, with people walking their kids or going to school or whatever. Anybody else?
Great presentation. I know we've got some more programming to go. Excuse me. But if you looked on the bottom side of those cookies, it said that the cookies may put you to sleep. But if you want to, please stand up, stretch, and then sit down. Anybody want to do that? I mean, there you go. Oh, there you go. Okay. Oh, ooh. Okay. Doesn't that feel good? Yeah. Okay. Now sit down. Okay. And I think that actually I think Tyler's looking for people who want to contribute to experiments. He's looking for people that might be willing to live in a trench for a couple of months. He would also, there's the trench foot, trench mouth, and various other things that you might want to experiment in. Okay, now that everybody's getting seated, some of you have more material to work with than others, but feel free to be seated. Our next presenter is another one of these